to the opening. Necesitan usar los auriculares para poder escuchar el evento de hoy. Can you listen? Yeah? Is it working? Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to this event that is being co-led by Avina, Wings, and the Alliance Voices for Just Climate Action. During this event, we will have interpretation because the panelists will be speaking in English, in Portuguese, and in Spanish. So, how to use the interpretation? You have to scan the QR code with your cell phone, and you can just listen, choose the language you prefer, and listen from your cell phone, whether it is with earphones or just like in a concert, whatever. I don't know. Lo voy a decir en castellano. Este evento va a contar con intérpretes, tanto en inglés, en portugués y en español. Así que aquellos que quieran usar este servicio tienen que escanear el código QR desde sus celulares y pueden escucharlo directamente en los distintos idiomas de su preferencia. Así que por favor estoy haciendo un poco de tiempo para que puedan escanear con tranquilidad. Vamos a tener panelistas hablando en inglés, en portugués y en castellano. Well, I didn't present myself. Sorry for that. I was like super enthusiastic. My name is Paz González. I am part of the climate program in Fundación Avina. And it's an honor to have this event with such a wonderful organizations that are friends. I feel like they are friends for me. And with panelists that will be sharing insights on how funding can reach the local level. So we'll be listening from different voices, philanthropy, NGOs, indigenous peoples communities, and the Adaptation Fund. So how they envision these opportunities so that finance can really reach the local level. So that being said, I will introduce the moderator for today, which is Charlotte Scott from South North, a lovely partner of ours. And she will introduce to the panelists, and then we will have this lovely event. And I don't want to forget that while we are speaking, there's a person, an artist, listening to us, and she will be harvesting the information, and we will be watching her art at the end of the event. So thank you very much for coming today.
Great. Thank you so much, Paz, for that introduction. Yeah, it does feel like we are having a conversation amongst friends at a really big venue with some other friends. So I'd like to get us started by inviting to the stage. We will be having 4 really interesting speakers today to have a conversation on how to drive access to finance at the local level. First, can I invite Lourdes Inga from the Executive Director of the International Funders for Indigenous Peoples. Thank you, Lourdes. And then next, please can I invite Rodrigo Montaldi, Program Manager of the Casa Socioambiental Fund, also part of our VCA program. And then can I invite Lucas De Pietro from the Adaptation Fund, new Adaptation Fund Board Chair, to the stage. And then last but not least, please Laura Senyan to the stage from Foundation Avina, Director of Strategic Partnerships. Great, we have a panel of actors with experience on working in local funds, working with big climate funds, and working with philanthropy. So we have quite an interesting mix to share some experiences, some of the challenges, and hopefully some of the solutions that are already being implemented. What we'll do is we'll have a round of questions for each panelist to give you a chance to introduce your work and the focus for this panel, and then we'll open for some questions as much as we have time for today. It's very difficult, I suppose, for just 1 hour to cover such a big topic, but let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with Lourdes. Lourdes, I'd love to hear from you to maybe ground our conversation as we begin to discuss some of the challenges that you've seen in your work with IFIP on the primary challenges that Indigenous peoples face in securing direct access to climate finance.
Good day, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. I'll be speaking in English, but I'm Quechua descent from Peru. And I wanted to just address the question quickly because I know we're short on time. I think the biggest challenge that Indigenous peoples face in climate financing, in all sorts of financing, philanthropy, and other types of financing, is a systemic issue. Why do I say that? Because IFIP, we're known as IFIP, undertook a research study last year, which I have a copy here for those of you who may be interested. I have the QR. And what we came across after doing the research in philanthropy particularly is that 0.6% of philanthropic funding is going to Indigenous peoples, not even 1%, in comparison to the 1% on climate financing, right? So what does that look like? We looked at over 34,000 grants, and of that 0.6%, the situation is even worse. Why? Because of that 0.6%, only 33% actually went directly to Indigenous peoples' organizations. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, and a lot of different misunderstandings on what it means to partner, build relationships, and ultimately invest and fund Indigenous peoples' organization and the Indigenous peoples' movement at large.
Thanks so much. Lourdes, can I ask you a follow-up question, which is looking maybe at the broader landscape of climate finance? What do you see as needing to shift in that landscape to better align with the values and priorities of Indigenous peoples?
I want to point to a report, actually a document that was developed by the Indigenous Peoples Caucus Climate Change about 2-3 years ago. And it's called The Principles and Guidelines for Direct Access Funding for Indigenous Peoples' Climate Action, Biodiversity, Conservation, and Fighting Desertification for a Sustainable Planet. It's a very long name, and I'm happy to give you the link so that you can read it. But in those principles, and I'm not going to go into every principle, I'll go first maybe speaking as IFIP experience. We, and the way that we're working with philanthropy is encouraging all to put in practice what we refer to as the 5 R's of Indigenous philanthropy. These 5 R's are values that are based on Indigenous values and that are based on respect, responsibility, relationships, reciprocity, and our latest value is redistribution, which goes in hand with like what we've been finding all across the board. But the principles that specifically speak to the climate and biodiversity, one of them, and I think all across the movement, certainly in the work that IFIP is doing, it's calling for direct funding or direct financing with zero or minimal participation of intermediaries. In other words, there is a big push from the Indigenous movement to start moving away from intermediaries receiving funding and actually moving the funding directly to Indigenous communities, Indigenous organizations, and in the more recent years to a growing emergence of Indigenous-led funds. These are Indigenous organizations that come from the movement that are organizing and building and putting together grant-making programs to support directly Indigenous communities. So the principles, it's a great document to reference. I'm happy to give you the link after the conversation.
Thank you, Lourdes. Is that all right? Good. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that we've had many conversations at this COP, the Climate Finance COP, about direct access and different understandings of what direct means or how direct is direct access. And having funds that reach with zero intermediaries is a clear position. I think that is a clear call for what that direct access could look like. So thank you. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to turn to Rodrigo. Rodrigo at Fundo Casa has many, many years of experience as a fund manager with working with local communities and local actors to access funds in a way that is accessible and timely and responsive. And so I'd love to hear from you on what, on how accessing that direct finance has impacted communities. What are some of the success stories that you are seeing and how important they have been?
Primeiramente, pedir licença para falar em português, para facilitar a minha comunicação com vocês.
So firstly, I'll excuse myself to be speaking Portuguese to make my communication easier.
Bom, o Fundo Casa é uma organização da sociedade civil que apoia a partir do financiamento e o fortalecimento de capacidade das comunidades de base.
So Fundo Casa is a civil society organization that supports in the strengthening and development of the social organizations on the ground.
Mobilizamos recursos, fornecemos suporte, fortalecemos as capacidades dessas organizações.
We mobilize resources, give support and do capacity building of those organizations.
E ao longo dos 20 anos, o Fundo Casa já apoiou aproximadamente 4.000 projetos dessas comunidades.
And we've supported over 4,000 projects in the last 20 years.
Começamos com 34 projetos em 2005.
In 2005, we had 34 projects.
Saltando para 480 projetos apenas em 2024.
2024, 450 projects.
Ou seja, saímos de R$338 mil em 2005 para mais de 26 milhões doados em 2024.
Wow, so about 300,000 reais, less than 100,000, $50,000 to 26 million.
2024.
26 million reais in 2024.
O que soma em 20 anos 150 milhões doados para as comunidades de base.
150 million donated to the base communities in 20 years.
Desses 4.000 projetos apoiados ao longo dos 20 anos, várias temáticas são apoiadas, mas a justiça climática ela está interseccionada nessas diversas agendas.
From all of the topics that they have supported in those 4,000 projects over the years, climate justice is transversal to all of that. So it's a very important issue that they're discussing with the communities.
Então, resiliência climática, defesa de direitos, proteção dos territórios.
Climate resilience, rights, territorial protection.
Ações para soluções sustentáveis ou soluções baseadas na natureza.
Nature-based solutions or actions to sustainable action solutions.
São algumas das ações das quais a gente apoia nesses 20 anos.
Are one of the actions that they support over the 20 years of work.
Entrando mais especificamente sobre os apoios específicos em adaptação, resiliência climática.
So, being more specific on adaptation and climate resilience.
E trazendo as experiências aqui para esse painel, a gente pode dizer que 60% dos apoios realizados em adaptação climática tem mulheres liderando os projetos, a execução dos projetos.
60% of the projects that relate to climate adaptation have women leading the way.
45% de associações locais, movimentos, coletivos e redes executando projetos de adaptação climática e resiliência.
45% of the adaptation and resilience projects are led by local communities and organizations from the base.
E populações indígenas, quilombolas, agricultoras e extrativistas liderando as iniciativas em seus territórios de resiliência climática.
And territorial communities like quilombolas, like indigenous peoples and other local communities leading the way from their own territory with their own knowledge.
E caminhando para o final, tendo como experiência uma aliança que iniciamos no começo desse ano, que é a Aliança VAC, Vozes pela Ação Climática.
So in the beginning of this year, we initiated an alliance that is Voices for Climate Action, VAC, its name in Portuguese.
Uma aliança com WWF, Fundação Avina e IVOS.
IVOS, Avina Foundation and WWF.
O Fundo Casa faz a gestão de um fundo emergencial.
We manage the emergency fund of this alliance.
E o chamamento para o Fundo Casa também atuar num fundo emergencial de VAC também tem um pouco da nossa experiência num fundo de resposta rápida a defensores em situação de ameaça e violência nos seus territórios.
Okay, so we come to this alliance with the experience of an emergency fund for fundo de emergência por quê? A experiência?
De emergência climática.
An emergency fund that they have in response for the disasters.
Então,
so they have a lot of experience there.
Então, trazendo essas experiências de VAC, em um apoio de R$1.700.000, a gente conseguiu apoiar iniciativas de 30 projetos em resposta rápida para defensores ameaçados.
Okay, so they have supported a quick response for threatened defenders of climate.
E 30 projetos para defensores afetados pela emergência climática.
And 30 projects for people that are affected by climate emergencies.
E aí, dentro das linhas desses apoios, desde acesso aos espaços de tomada de decisão,
Access to decision making,
campanhas de comunicação, geração de evidências,
campaign communication, capacity building, evidence-based,
fortalecimento de capacidade e proteção jurídica.
strengthening discussions, and also the support with lawyers for them to be able to influence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It does highlight for me, I think, one of the discussions about the process of giving direct access is thinking about how we can build on the networks that already exist. And after 20 years of experience doing this kind of work, Fundo Casa has these deep networks and experience in supporting these projects, but also that just climate is not easy to, I forget the word, but that it's transversal to many other issues, and that supporting that broader sense of resilience is key in the work that Fundo Casa does. So thanks very much for highlighting that. Okay, I had a follow-up question which does feed into what you've shared with us already, Rodrigo, which is about the scale of local level finance and local level projects. Yes, thank you. And how we often hear discussions about how we can scale projects, whether that's scaling up or scaling out.
Okay.
But how can funders better support scalable models of local adaptation and locally led adaptation?
Sim. Acredito que uma resposta bem simples dentro do que a gente recebeu de demanda em 2024 pode responder a sua pergunta.
I have a very concrete answer regarding the demand that they received in 2024.
De 1.500 projetos que recebemos em 2024, ou seja, 75 milhões de demanda, 75 milhões de reais em demanda que recebemos em 2024.
Of 1,500 projects that they received, 75 million reais in demand in 2024.
A gente só conseguiu apoiar por conta de recursos 25 milhões, ou seja, 478 projetos.
We could only support 478 projects.
Ou seja, 30%
30%
é o que foi apoiado.
Is what we actually could support.
Então, falta, de fato, recursos para apoiar emergência e adaptação climática e uma necessidade, então, dos financiadores olhar para essas
So we lack resources for emergency and climate adaptation. So a very important need for funders to look at that issue more carefully.
Thank you. I think that does highlight that the scale is not lacking in the need, that there is demand for that kind of funding and could be distributed for those kinds of projects. Great. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to turn to Lucas about the Adaptation Fund and thinking about the role of the Adaptation Fund in this space. It's often lauded as one of the funds that has the highest level of grant-based financing and prioritizes direct access, and is very lauded for that effort. And so one of the questions first to you is about how the Adaptation Fund is adapting or innovating its approach to address some of the barriers that local actors face in accessing climate finance.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us here to this important event. I think that we hear from Lourdes the main structural barriers that are embedded in many of the international climate funds, and that prevent many local organizations to access these resources. As we are having problems with translation in this event, language is one of the main barriers that we face in accessing resources. And I can talk, I've been part of the national government in Argentina, and we had that problem at the national level. So imagine when you go to the local level, this is multiplied by 10,000. So this is a concrete barrier that we have to address, the language problem. Also, the application processes are complex. The language, not the language barrier, but the language that these processes are written, you have to have a very technical background to address the specific questions that they ask you to address, and also the requirements. When you start talking about the social and environmental policies, the gender policies that you have to address in your proposals, this is quite a challenge for local actors, because we are in the international arena, and we are all the time listening about the gender approach, the social approach, environmental safeguards. But when you go into the local level, these things might be a little bit disconnected to the international requirements that are in place to access. So this is a major barrier for many communities and indigenous people organizations that they are facing. Now, going to your question, which connects also with the second part that you are asking about. What are we doing to address all these issues, and how can we create a better channels and tools for local organizations? Recently, the Adaptation Fund has been pioneering in adopting the locally led adaptation principles that were actually the fund participating in the development with the Global Commission on Adaptation, and was the first fund to adopt those principles. Sorry, I was speaking too low. The mission to reach the local level is one of the main mission of the fund, because we fund concrete adaptation projects on the ground through grants. As you mentioned, we are 100% grant-based organization, which is also a plus when we talk with developing countries that they are already in debt and they are not going to take more debt, or it's difficult to take additional debt for climate action. So that's a additional benefit from the Adaptation Fund perspective. But going to the local action, we recently approved a locally led adaptation approach. We developed 3 windows for funding. One is a single country project window, which allows country to access up to $5 million to work at the local level. And this is additional to the country cap, which is actually at $20 million for each country. So each country has this $20 million, and now they have an additional $5 million for local action. But I think that more relevant for this event and this space is that we launch our locally led aggregator, which is a program of $35 million, which we made. We call for organizations, multilateral organizations, to present programs to work at the local level. And particularly, there was a proposal for UNDP for a program of up to $10 million who will give grants of $250,000 for each community-based organization or indigenous people organization in Africa to work at the local level. So we are in the process of approving these programs, and hopefully next year will be in place and will be available for organizations to apply. In my region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we have two different aggregators program. One with CAF to work through nature-based solutions and urban development. So that will be how local actors can get engaged in adaptation solutions in urban and through nature-based solutions. And there is another one dedicated to the Caribbean through the Caribbean Development Bank, which mostly focus on early warning systems at the local level. So that will be the most the news coming from the fund, and luckily this next year we will have all working and available for all actors to access. And my final comment will be regarding direct access. You were mentioning direct access. The fund allows direct access, which aims to empower national institutions. But sometimes there is a confusion that organizations can access their resources directly, which is not the case. So sometimes that's why I was talking about the languages that we call the codes that we use in international organizations, and then when we translate it into the local level, it's not the same, because when you say direct access, I say, okay, I can access the resources directly. It's not like that. You have to accredit yourself to the Adaptation Fund or the Green Climate Fund. It's not an easy process. You have to have to fulfill a lot of requirements, legal requirements. It's not an easy task. Of course, it's very important if a national government decides to accredit a national bank, a ministry, or whatever, that's great, but it's not simple. So I want just to convey this message, because sometimes people say, okay, I'm going to get access directly to these channels, and it's not just like that. It's time-consuming, energy-consuming, and resources-consuming. So just to be clear that when we talk about direct access, we talk about the specific methodology that the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and other multilateral funds has in place, but it's not just resources or money for one go and taking. So, but that will be my contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas. Yeah, my second question was going to be about highlighting specific initiatives from the Adaptation Fund, but I think you've covered that well. It's really great to hear about those initiatives that are happening and being rolled out. And so hopefully, maybe when we reconvene next year, we will be having other conversations about how those have gone and how we've progressed. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, I would love to turn to Laura. We've had some discussions about how climate funds can work to disperse access and how we can improve access at the local level. But I know that Foundation Avina has quite a lot of experience also working with philanthropy as another source of funding, and the benefits and opportunities that it can provide. So our first question to you, Laura, is what do you see as the role of philanthropy in improving access and engaging with philanthropy to support that access at the local level?
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, it's weird listening to myself. Bueno, buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Creo que seguimos teniendo problemas de traducción, ¿no?
¿Te ayudo?
No, it's okay. I can do it in English. I was just checking. I feel more comfortable in Spanish. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Charlotte, for the question, and I think that is great that we are speaking after your interventions, because, well, my name is Laura Señán, as Charlotte mentioned. I work at Fundación Avina. Fundación Avina is a Latin American foundation working as a regional intermediary, and when we call intermediary, we are talking about intermediating any kind of resources, not only financial resources, but also relationships, also guiding and identifying opportunities to fulfill collaboration gaps, and I will address afterwards that. But as a philanthropic organization, and to your question on the role of philanthropy, I think that the most direct answer would be which is the role of philanthropy to ensure direct access. I think that here we have two great examples that perfectly explain the role of philanthropy. But we have to understand that philanthropic ecosystem is something broader than what sometimes we understand, especially in global north context about philanthropy. And it's a diverse ecosystem. It's not monolithic, and it changes depending on the context. And the philanthropic ecosystem should be at the disposal of what communities, of what the local actors need. And that was the first point that I want to mention, the fact that it's not acting alone. I mean, the philanthropic ecosystem, first of all, we are diverse within the ecosystem. We have the complementarity of local funds, of indigenous funds, working specifically on certain identities. We have the role of regional organizations, regional foundations, and we coexist with other institutions from public and private origin that are also contributing to the same goal. And it's I think that we have a responsibility to understand the ecosystem, understand how it changes, and adapt to that. And a complementary role that the philanthropic organizations have to ensure access at local level, it's also to make proposals, specific proposals, and take specific actions in relationship with these other sources of funding. Fundación Avina is an accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund. And Luca mentioned, this is not a strategy of financing ourselves or financing the philanthropic ecosystem, but it's a political statement and an investment, actually, as you mentioned. It's a resource investment in order to, one, channeling funds, and secondly, contribute to transform this culture that sometimes exists in the public sector mechanisms, and the philanthropy can also play a role in addressing the language barriers, the technicalities, and well, I'm not going to repeat what Luca just mentioned. Also, I would like to finish this question, Charlotte, by saying that the role that philanthropy we have in the broader philanthropic ecosystem, different responsibilities. These days, at this COP and in continuation to last year's COPs, we've been having conversation among Global South philanthropies. Again, example, Lourdes and Fundo Casa have also been part of this conversation, because we have to understand that we have different roles and responsibilities in Global North and Global South funders and philanthropic cultures, and what we need to align in order to solve these barriers. And the Global South philanthropic sector, the Global South philanthropic infrastructure, it's key. I mean, when we are addressing this question and the need of indigenous communities and community-led action, it is. I think that is evident for this audience. What are the differences? The differences taking into account the proximity, the capillarity, the understanding of local needs, which is key, as my colleagues mentioned, to ensure flexible access. So this complementarity within understanding the political perspectives and positions within the ecosystem among Global North, Global South, but also within among the different actors and public, philanthropic, and private sources of funding. This collaboration is what is needed to achieve the goal that we all have. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I had a question about maybe Foundation Avina's approach to how to make that space of philanthropy more accessible to the local level. You've touched on it already, I think, but maybe you in your own work.
Yeah. So, thank you for the question. Fundación Avina works. It works in three main thematic pillars: climate action, innovation in democracy, and regenerative economies. And we've been working on climate for the last 30 years. And as many Global South organizations, we cannot only decide one topic because intersectionality is the reality in which we live. When it comes to climate, we have our main two priorities and actions, which are climate governance and influencing in climate governance mechanisms, and connecting that to the local level, where we address what we identify as collaboration gaps. And I would like to share with you some of these collaboration gaps that are preventing, that we consider are preventing funds to reach the local level. The first one is the dichotomies that you were also talking about. That this in our countries, the climate development divide sometimes makes difficult this access because it amplifies the sources, it diversifies the sources to access. So understanding that it is not only when we are addressing challenges related to climate, we are talking about systemic challenges. We are talking about, as Lourdes mentioned, institutional capacities in most of the cases. We are talking about informality. We are talking about legal frameworks, lack of connections. What we try to do is addressing these issues in a systemic way. The second collaboration gap that we identify as key is the inclusion gap, the lack of participation of every actors and actually voices of climate action. And that's our the reason why we are part of this program is because for us it's a priority. This inclusion of all the stakeholders that are contributing to climate solutions. One example of that, it's, for example, Alvina has been working with wait speakers for the last 30 years as well, and at different levels, and at regional level in collaboration and partnerships with the objective of including wait speakers in the recycling value chains as active stakeholders of the value chain in collaboration with private sector and public sector. In Latin America, but not only in Latin America, but mostly in the Global South, the role of waste speakers in identifying and contributed to the carbon footprint as an adaptation measure has not been included in public policy or NDC's commitments. So these kind of measures are identifying how this group of key group of stakeholders has not been included in the climate conversation are some of the actions that we are also pursuing. And finally, and connected to again to Luca's comment on the difficulties and the problems that local organizations find when trying to address these climate finance commitments from traditional institutions is the climate rationale. As you mentioned, it's not only about language, but also how do we understand climate impact and how sometimes in these institutions, and not only public institutions, but also philanthropic institutions, are tagging climate impact in a way that sometimes is not shared by local communities. Local communities have the knowledge and the capacity to not only to understand what are the solutions for their problems, but also to teach and show to the other institutions how to frame a climate project. And that's why for us it's key, and we will continue working with Fundo Casa also in the challenge of loss and damages and addressing how do we understand the climate impact of a forest fire, for example, and now in the process of the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund to create evidence. I mean, philanthropy has the capacity to work at this level and create evidence that then can be uplifted and can be shared with other institutions that are allowed, as the case, or are open, as the case of the Adaptation Fund, to take these recommendations into account. For us, is this collaboration gap on flexible financing at a broader level, but not only targeting a specific sectors, is also key. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Great. With that, I think that has given us a great picture, maybe of the complexity, also of the landscape, of engaging with philanthropy. I think in our conversation we have traversed philanthropy, the climate funds, and also access at the local level in different spaces. And I think we'll have some time now for questions just before we close our panel discussion. But I think we have also traversed quite a lot of ground on how to align all the different actors who are involved, and also the different forms of knowledge and evidence that are needed in different places that have different contexts, but still to make it simple and accessible at the local level is a real challenge at the heart of our work. And it's great to showcase some solutions as well as challenges here that we can advance. Okay, can I open for questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, my name is Farah Osman. I'm from Somalia. I work with Plan International, and I'm touched by the challenge you talked about. I think they cut across all areas we are working with. And I think when we're talking about the challenge of the local organizations, and one, apart from the bureaucratic challenge in terms of the requirements, is the trust of the donors, of the local organizations. I can give you an example of Somalia. We work with local organizations. We work on the localization agenda. And when I looked at the other EU, UN, other organizations, they do not directly fund local organizations. They have to partner with international organizations. And the international organizations are the custodian of these local organizations. Meaning that how will they build their capacity? They have technological constraints. They have the capacity because they are not given the space to design the projects, to develop, to participate in the proposal development. They are only told that you have to implement. So how will they be able to do that? Then the other thing is access to technology, and then the local knowledge. Sometimes we're not talking about climate change, disasters, all of the things. The local knowledge and the participation of the local community is very, very minimal. It's decided from the top. And sometimes the projects that are designed from the top may not be applicable at the local context. So I think it is important to have a bottom-up approach where the discussions before even the funds, the discussions start from the community level. What are their contexts? What are their knowledge? What can they do better? How can they do it better so that they own the initiative and they feel that their participation can play a role? The other thing that you have mentioned is the lack of flexibility of the funds. There are lots of conditions tied to access to the funds, which is not favorable to the local organizations. So I think there's a shift of the paradigm shift where we need to look at how do we make this flexible if we mean to empower the local organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take one more question and then we'll go to the panel? One at the back there. Just conscious of time, I think we'll take those two.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think on behalf of local communities that are even in the room, I really appreciate your discussion from the Avina on how the local community's contribution is often perceived and in connection to funding. How does this contribution of the local community then is translated to where money is going? I think that is the biggest problem that we have, because usually local communities, especially grassroots women, are often considered as the end beneficiaries of the money. While we are contributing so much, we are the ones that are bringing innovations on the table. Even when you fund governments, even when you fund big international organizations, the person that is on the ground, the local communities, the grassroots women are the ones that are doing the real work, that are also using their struggles to develop innovations and activities that are minimizing or that are doing the real climate action. So our experience is the kind of funding that I heard from you, Lucas, is really hard for not just communities to compete for resources, but also to even support in holding institutions that have resources accountable. Because we do not know how this kind of funding landscape looks like. We don't know how much money is going, even if it's for the government or to the organizations that are intermediary, but instead we are just implementing and supporting the activities. So it is very important. We just had a last session that was looking at how can we ensure that the communities in this discussion understand the funding landscape, participate in designing even how the money is going to be used, because you cannot just fund government and think everything is going to be like one size fits it all. Every community has their own needs, have their way they are going to address. There's a lot of indigenous knowledge and information that the communities can also contribute. So even if we are not going to be part of the funding scape that you are talking about, how can we be part of designing the funding so that it fits the real situation that we have? How can we be part of monitoring implementation? Those are the questions I want to ask. And what kind of money needs to come to us so that we can really be in the system of designing and in the system of monitoring? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I think we'll take those two questions. I'm going to give our panelists a chance to respond. I don't think either were directed to a specific person. Would anybody like to? Lourdes? You want to go? Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, couldn't hear myself. So thank you for the comments and questions. I love the fact that particularly your very wise suggestion of even if I go back to systemic issue. There's clearly a systemic issue and that needs to be addressed. But even if, as we are addressing that, that in the case of speaking on indigenous peoples, that certainly there should be a mechanism to ensure accountability, to ensure that there's no violations of rights of indigenous peoples, right? Because ultimately what it seems that it's happening is that these financial mechanisms that are put in place, and I'm not going to speak about philanthropy right now, are kind of outsourcing responsibility, right? With no mechanism, or perhaps mechanisms that are in place, but not necessarily mechanisms that are actually understood by the communities that are meant to serve. And I think there's a clear need to really think about how this happens. From the design stage, indigenous people should be part of those conversations, should be part of the negotiation, should be part of the monitoring, and should be part of the decision if they should and want to continue to work with those intermediaries, that these financial mechanisms or this climate, all the different ways in which funding is flowing are identifying or are being accredited to work with them, with indigenous communities. I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen. I go back to the principles that I quoted earlier, because there's 10 to 12 different principles that were addressed. IFF also has in its work several guides to point to funders on how should we be partnering with indigenous peoples. Not only indigenous peoples in general, but we also have specific guides that address funding and support to indigenous women's organizations, which, by the way, of all the funding that goes to women and girls, philanthropic funding to women and girls, only 1.4% is reaching indigenous women.
Sure. Thank you, Lourdes. Can I invite one more person to reflect, and then we will close? Who would like to?
Yeah, no, very, very shortly, and adding to the voice of what Lourdes said, and I think that's many times, particularly when we're talking about indigenous people, indigenous communities, there are unresolved tensions within the national or state governments and the communities. And these tensions sometimes are not reflected when we say that we are going to make some local project and are not incorporated from the beginning and creating ownership from the local communities in order to solve these tensions that are historical tensions that exist. And of course, sometimes these are overpassed. And we see this not only on adaptation, but for instance, in the Red Plus initiative on mitigation, there is a lot of problem with local communities, land ownership, and there's so many issues that need to be addressed. And it cannot be a top-down approach and the project, and you say, I have the resource, and then I go to the community and say, this is my the resources I'm going to share with you, and also the benefits. How do you share the benefits that are arising from this the implementation of this project? But that's very small comment from our perspective as a fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. I feel like we don't have the time to do justice to this topic in the next 2 minutes, but thank you. Final words from Laura or Rodrigo before we close?
Just very quickly, my final words are going to be a reaction also to the question. Very, very short. We do think that the best way of flexibilizar access to resources is to understand that we don't all have the same capacities to take risks. But of course that we need to understand that and point it out when there's not flexibility. But we also can think in a collaborative way in understanding what. Thank you. I'm sorry for creating this. In understanding that collaborating and contributing from the position that each of us has, if we can take the risk that the public sector cannot assume, philanthropy can do it in a collaborative way, and then go back with the private sector, and these can also leverage funds from private companies. This, I do think, and I think that is a shared vision, is the only way forward to achieve this challenge.
Thank you. Rodrigo.
Eu acredito que o papel da filantropia é justamente fazer com que o recurso chegue de forma menos burocrática na ponta. I
tried it.
Bueno, I believe that the role of philanthropy is to make sure that the money arrives with less bureaucracy to where it really needs.
E para isso processo de escuta junto com as comunidades, junto com os territórios, ele é constante e ele é necessário ser sensível.
And it's really necessary to have sensibility, to have the hearing process throughout the way with the communities.
Então, a desburocratização dos nossos processos enquanto fundos filantrópicos é algo necessário juntamente com esse processo de escuta sensível.
So this bureaucratization, if that word exists, so taking out the bureaucracies, with the funds, it's absolutely crucial and necessary throughout the way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much to our panel for your rich insights, for sharing with us the challenges, the solutions. I have the job of doing the closing, which is very difficult, and I'm going to keep it very short because I think we've had a very rich discussion that is much nuanced. I have one maybe reflection to leave with you from our discussion today. We had this event about how to increase access to finance at the local level, and maybe to reflect that we are not just talking about funds and money reaching the local level, but actually ways to support the agency and self-actualization of actors at the local level, Indigenous communities, local communities. And that requires us to do more than just track the money and where it goes. And so we've talked about what the knowledge we use, how to be included in decision making, how to make those funds accessible in a meaningful way. And that is the note I will leave us on today. Please, we have a graphic harvester who has been doing an amazing job, a tough job of trying to graphically represent our discussion. I think there are several slides. I think they have captured many of the elements that we've discussed. It's quite amazing. So please take some time to look at them. Our time is up, but we will keep sharing those images up there for you to, hopefully it helps you to percolate. Great. And I will hand over to Daniela very quickly.
So I just wanted to thank everyone and provoke that since we will have next COP in Latin America and the Caribbean, could we think about what is it that we want to achieve in this conversation to Belém, right? Like that we live here with action in our hearts and in our bodies and in our minds and responsibility to understand that we have a pathway that it's through Belém, obviously, but what is it that we want to achieve? What is the conversations that we need to be having throughout the year so that we get there celebrating advances? So please, we will all be with our hearts and minds open to having that conversation. So reach out, and thank you very much for this meaningful conversation.
Thank you.